It is my pleasure to be with you this morning or this afternoon, depending on when you're seeing this. My name is Peter Bishop. I'm with the organization called Teach the Future, an organization whose purpose and mission is to bring futures thinking, foresight, and future studies to classes and to schools around the world. I was the director of the Foresight program in graduate studies at the University of Houston for a long time. And having graduated, I created this organization to bring exactly the same kind of insights and methods that we teach to graduate students to secondary students and college undergraduates. We believe that it is extremely important that students learn to think about the future in a systematic and sophisticated way as they prepare themselves for adulthood, for life, and for work in this future, which frankly is much more theirs than it is ours. The purpose of bringing futures thinking is to balance basically the study of the past with the study of the future, and indeed the study of the present. We think of time divided into 3 chapters, not just 2. There's an article called The End of History Illusion, which basically says that history ends with us. But of course, when we think about it, we realize that it does not. It goes on. We certainly hope it goes on, and we expect it to go on. And we should be thinking about the future as we think about the past. People tell us, well, you can't study the future because it hasn't happened yet. Of course, it doesn't exist. By the same token, however, the past doesn't exist, at least anymore. The difference, of course, is that we know to some extent, and to a large extent, what happened in the past as a result of reading documents and studying fossils and photographs and all the other artifacts that come to us from the past. Generations of the future have not left us anything. They do not send us anything. So the study is different, but it's just as important. We are a chapter. We are an episode in the story of human civilization. And we should see ourselves as such, not just as the end of history, but as an interim point between the past and the future. A second reason for studying the future is because the times have changed so that studying the future is not just nice to have, but we believe it is essential to have. My colleague Rial Miller in Paris with UNESCO uses the phrase, the changing conditions of change. Change itself has changed from the time when we were young and when previous generations thought about the future. Change in the 20th century had its disruptions, but for the most part, it was fairly constant, fairly linear, fairly smooth. With the appearance of the internet and the ability to transmit ideas around the world, for those ideas to clash and merge and create innovations and issues that are unprecedented and surprising. It's no longer possible to think about the future as simply upwardly sloping trends, expected futures, futures which we can predict and project as we go along. No, the future now is full of disruptions, many more disruptions than used to be, and we need to think about how those go. Traditional forecasting and indeed traditional social science expects us to be able to support things we say about the future with evidence. One can support the growing number of computers, the increasing warming of the planet, the growth of the world's population using trends and data extrapolation. That's fine. But how does one support the appearance of a disruption? How does one populate the future with disruptions exactly as the past has been populated with its disruptions? Well, that's different, of course. What we do is what people do when they train for complex tasks, like astronauts or airline pilots, or even professional sports teams. They ask the question, well, what if? What if this fuse goes out? What if the landing gear doesn't deploy? What if someone gets sick? Pilots may fly their whole life without those things happening to them, but if they do, they are prepared. They use hypothetical disruptions to prepare for the future. What we want to do, therefore, with students while they are still forming their ideas about the future is to treat them to that kind of thinking, that kind of contingent, hypothetical thinking that allows them to prepare for change even when they do not expect it to be. Therefore, we change the rules of forecasting from what you can support with evidence, which is part of it, but also what you can plausibly imagine, which is also part of it. And those are the aspects of change which we study and introduce to students, both the mindset and the approach to be able to think about the future as a series of not a destination, one future, but rather a series of a set of futures which could become plausible that they could live in. That's the major fundamental difference between forecasting the traditional way and now forecasting the futures way. But that's also what we call inbound change. Those are the changes that will happen in the world, many of whom will affect us and our lives in the future. We're also going to teach, however, about outbound change, the fact that we are not victims of those inbound changes. While they constrain us and they influence us, we do not necessarily are not determined by them. We also have resources, actions, intentions, indeed visions and goals for the world that we would like to see happen. Most of us do not have the power or the influence to create the world that we wish we could live in, but if we put our effort to it over long periods of time, using skill and persistence, we will achieve more of those goals than if we just sit back and wait for the future to occur as it would without our actions. That's empowerment. That's giving students a sense that while they can't have every future they wish, they can have more of their preferred future than if they did not take the effort. So we end up teaching two fundamental mindsets. The first is anticipation, getting ready for and preparing for the future, conditioning oneself to live in worlds that are surprising, they're different, and indeed ones which we cannot predict. But the other mindset is influence. We take actions, which we create better lives for ourselves, our families, our communities, and to the extent possible for the world as a whole. We believe this is not just a nice thing to have added to the curriculum of the 21st century. We believe it is an absolutely necessary ingredient to the students of today becoming the successful adults, workers, citizens, parents, and all-around individuals in the future. 100 years from now, my vision is that people will look back on the early part of this century and say, well, why didn't you teach the future? What was wrong with it? Weren't you preparing your students for the future and that future being more disruptive than ever? I don't think we have a good answer for that. And so I'm dedicating myself, and the other people in this broadcast are dedicating themselves to introducing futures thinking where we can and how we can. And we thank the many, many teachers and the many, many advocates we have assembled from around the world, from more than 20 countries, of which the Teach the Future Mexico chapter is one of the strongest and most interesting. So I thank you for the opportunity to share my ideas and my passion for introducing futures thinking to the students of the world today. And I look forward to hearing from my colleagues on what they have to add to this important message. Thank you very much.